Friends, welcome to our midweek meditation. I'm Victor Kim. I'm the lead minister at Richmond Presbyterian Church. And through these midweek meditations recently, we've been in conversation with members of our congregation, especially during this season of pandemic, as we have been unable to gather in person with each other. This has been a way of being able to perhaps get to know people within our congregation at a deeper level with a bit more context. And we're beginning these conversations with our elders, who are our spiritual leaders, also servants of the church, and they are the ones responsible for the overall care of our congregation. And so I think it makes sense to begin with conversations with our elders. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Steve Norris, one of our elders from the congregation. Some of you will remember that a couple of weeks back, we had a conversation with Janet, Steve's wife. And so today, of course, it's kind of like the newlywed game, right? To say, are you both on the same page? Steve, welcome. And it's great to be in conversation with you today.
Thanks, Victor. Great to be with you.
So part of how we do this is I just sort of invite you to tell us a little bit about who you are, where have you come from, maybe a little bit about your own family background, and then sort of where you are now, and maybe a little bit of the journey from how you got from where you started to where you are today. So if you want to tell us what you'd like on that, we'd be delighted to hear you.
Sure, that's a broad statement, a broad question. I was born and raised, Victor, on an island in the Pacific. And I'm rather unique in that I'm one of the few people you probably know that had to move east to get to Vancouver.
Huh.
Now that sounds rather exotic, but when I tell you I'm from Victoria, it probably bursts the bubble on that one. So not quite as alluring. So I was born in Victoria, and a lot of family history in Victoria. My father was also born in Victoria, and his father as well. And my paternal great-grandfather was originally from England, born in Ontario, but lived most of his life in Victoria as well. So he arrived in Victoria as a 10-year-old with his family in the 1860s. So I can't imagine what Victoria was like in the 1860s, but there mustn't have been much to it. Probably a Hudson Bay outpost of some sort or something like that, but not much to it. The family had a lot of businesses. My great-grandfather started a business, and he included his sons in it later when they grew up, and it was F. Norris and Sons Saddlery and Leather Goods. I guess that was in the horse and buggy days. The family also had a couple of other businesses, a soapworks business, and then later that became Bapco Paint, British American Paint Company. You may have heard of that. And my dad, after the war, he worked almost his entire career at Bapco. So that was a big part of our lives. He was in the war, overseas for almost the entire length of the war. He trained in England and served in France and Italy and in Holland. He was in Holland at the end of the war, and he always told me stories of how welcoming and warm and how appreciative the Dutch were of the Canadians over there. So that was kind of cool. My mother grew up in Weyburn, Saskatchewan. She moved out during the war to work for the Wartime Prices and Trade Board, it was called, I believe. And she worked in secretarial fields back then. They met after the war in Victoria at a dance. Apparently, the story goes, and they were married in 49. I came along in 53, and my sister 4 years later. Had a very stable childhood and background. We lived in the same house for my entire childhood. I graduated from Oak Bay High School, and I was the first person in my family to go to university. So I went off to UVic and did a BA in psychology and social welfare. I hung around in Victoria for, I guess it was about 3 more years before I moved, and worked in child and youth care counselor. I was a relief social worker, child welfare social worker for a while, ran a program with a couple of other child care workers that was unfortunately not continued, the funding of it. And the employment situation back in the mid to late 70s wasn't that great. So I sort of recognized that if I wanted to work in my field, I probably would have to look afield. So applied for various jobs and got one in the wilds of Port Coquitlam, which I'd never even heard of at that time. One of the things about growing up on the island is that you're kind of insular, and we hardly ever left the island. So it was our world. It might as well be a continent as an island. So, anyways, I packed up and off I went for my great adventure going to the lower mainland in Port Coquitlam. That was a really good experience. It was a program called Family Support Worker, working in homes with families where the kids were at risk of apprehension. Couples, family counseling, parenting counseling, and I did play therapy groups with kids. I kind of worked with the team of family support workers. They became really good friends, and that was great for a single person. Moved away from home, so got very involved socially with them. Some of them are still good friends of mine today. So that was a great option. Sadly, that program was closed down after about 4 years, and government in their wisdom decided they would not fund that anymore. Because I had a degree, I was shuttled into child welfare social work position, which actually was the one position in my career that I didn't enjoy. It was sort of a social cop, apprehending kids and going to courts, and it wasn't exactly the helping sort of field that I was hoping for and looking for, and that was more meaningful. The good news is that kind of triggered me to go back to school and get a graduate degree in counseling psychology from Simon Fraser University. It took me 5 years because I was working full-time and studying part-time, but I got there eventually. And from there, I moved into the addictions field and worked in that area for quite a few years. A lot of people say, oh, that must have been awfully difficult clientele, but you know, they always say that there's no one as grateful as a recovering addict. And I found my work in addictions to be probably the most meaningful in my career. And a lot of faith-based aspects to it, and the 12 steps and those programs, and letting go, letting God, sort of connecting with faith and turning it over and such. So those were good years. Initially, it was as an outpatient counselor and program educator at Robson Clinic, alcohol and drug programs. And as part of that, I was seconded a couple of times for about a year each. Once at the Vancouver Methadone Clinic, which was pretty hardcore. And again, with the City of Vancouver Health Department, with a sort of a harm reduction early intervention program that was quite novel at the time. It looked at catching people, drinkers who were at the early stage of abuse, but certainly not alcoholic and not wanting to abstain or go to AA, but were looking to reduce and control their drinking. So calculating blood alcohol levels, standard drink units, those kinds of things. So that was a really interesting program, and I've used those skills and that approach throughout my career. Again, unfortunately, government decided to privatize back in the late, I guess this would have been the mid '80s or so, and shut down a lot of the programs that were funded through government, and privatized services and downsized the public service. And sort of seeing the writing on the wall, I decided to put in an application to open an outpatient clinic myself. I needed a board, or create a board, or tack onto a board. So I approached the largest nonprofit society in Vancouver, Family Services of Greater Vancouver. They agreed to take me on. And to my great amazement, my application was approved, and suddenly out of nowhere, I was the founder and director of North Burnaby Alcohol and Drug Counseling Services. So that was a wild few years, and it was seat of the pants stuff. I had to find an office and negotiate a lease and purchase furniture. I remember going to Costco and loading furniture onto my roof of my car and putting it together up in the office, and hiring staff and interviewing them in the cafe down below. You know, we got it together, and around that. That was, you know, a very intense time, but really a very powerful and meaningful time for me. Cocaine was a big drug at the time, and I wrote a book on cocaine recovery and led groups. Started the Cocaine Anonymous groups in Vancouver that are still going today. But I was finding that I was working 2 or 3 nights a week. I was spending more and more time on the administration side of it and having to scramble to get funds and apply for grants. And it was getting harder and more difficult and challenging. And I started looking for a way out, frankly. I started checking out the post-secondary counseling situation. I applied for a job at Douglas College. I didn't get it. This was, I guess, 1990. I found out later that a young lady got the job. And you can imagine who that young lady was. It was Janet. And she was working there for a few years on contract before. The dean said, though she was impressed and was hoping that I would continue to look at Douglas, and there was another position coming up the next year. In the interim, I did get a job offer from Fraser Valley, teaching in their social services program, and I hummed and hawed about that. And this was one of those crossroads in life moments, and I decided finally not to take it, which turned out good in the long run. And sure enough, next year, the posting at Douglas College came up again, and I was successful. And well, it turned out that I was there for 26 years, so who knew, huh? So that was a wonderful job, a wonderful opportunity for me. Teaching in counseling psychology courses in personal development and interpersonal communication and career planning and vocational testing. I was very involved in the Professional Association, BC Post-Secondary Counselors Association, on the executive there for a number of years. And yeah, we retired together, the two of us. Janet was in the New Westminster campus, and I was at the Coquitlam campus. And we retired as a team. We kind of decimated the Douglas College Counseling Department by both retiring in the fall of 2017. Along the way, I'd done some private practice, and we both decided in early 2017 that we would open a private practice, part-time only, and that overlapped a bit with our time at the college. But once the college ended, then we set it up with a group called the Creative Counseling Group. The office is up on West Broadway. We had 2 days a week. And well, we've been doing that since. And of course, it was all in person to begin with, but with the pandemic, that shut down the office for at least for quite a while. And Zoom took over. And so we've been doing largely Zoom calls, although I've been doing reopened a bit part-time with clients in person with protocols attached. So that's kind of a two-bit tour of my career and education, Victor.
Well, it's covered a lot in a few minutes, and this sounds like it sounds like you have such a breadth of experience around all sorts of counseling issues, which must be very interesting to have encountered what you've encountered in your career. And again, the breadth of experience, some of it working with students, some of it working with addicts, some of it just right on the streets, and obviously some of these things that you discovered very quickly you really didn't want to be part of, sort of an enforcement part of that whole counseling area. So very, very interesting. And I'm sure we could pick your brain for hours about some of the more interesting things that you encountered, although I'm sure you're bound by some of the confidentiality issues, of course, around your profession. But tell me a little bit about, so you've touched a little bit about some of the challenges of the pandemic, which has led us to utilize the technology that we're using right now. A lot of these Zoom calls or video conferencing calls. Tell me some other ways that the pandemic has impacted sort of your life, maybe your work, or how you see it impacting people around you. You're obviously someone who observes people, who observes people's behavior and things like this. What do you see that's happening in people because of the pandemic? What are you noticing most?
Well, it certainly exacerbates problems that are already there.
Yeah.
When we talk about substance use and family violence and depressions and anxieties that are simmering for a lot of folks, the fact that we are isolated, disconnected, we don't have our support systems, we don't have our exercise routines, we don't have our family supports, personal supports, and so on, that just makes the whole circumstance and situation more difficult. And certainly it's been a big issue for for everybody, for that matter, just not only folks who struggled in those ways.
So you see maybe some of our vulnerabilities that are heightened because of the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you tell people who are struggling with that, with people that are more anxious than they normally might be, maybe more fearful, maybe a more prone to, maybe what we call some of the extremes of our emotional range, maybe more angry, more depressed. What do you, I know it's not a one size fits all solution, but what would be something good for us to keep in mind?
Well, sometimes it's important just to sit with it and recognize that this circumstance is highly unusual, and whatever depressions and anxieties I'm having are situational specific. They're not organic in any way. And the concept of self-care and self-compassion become really important here. Recognizing our own needs and being able to do what we can under the circumstance to meet them, and that's often difficult. But if there's opportunities to eat well, to get good sleep, to keep in contact with people as best as we can, and our Zoom services and midweek meditations and the time after the service for our socializing, that's something we can do at church. Obviously, getting out for exercise, walking, doing what we can, supporting each other, connecting, looking for the vulnerable people in our communities. And as an elder, for example, I have 3 elderly women who live on their own, and this time is extremely difficult for them. They don't have computers. They're not interested in learning how to use computers. So, but all they can do is phone, can contact by phone. One of them is in a long-term care facility, and she doesn't even get to go down for meals. The meals are brought up to her. So we're a big social outing event of the days. The 3 meals are not there. So it has to feel like being in solitary confinement, and the others as well. So I try to make especially an effort to contact with the people that are vulnerable. So as we sort of look through our families and our communities and sort of looking at who is the most vulnerable and how can we support and connect with them.
I think what you're talking about, it all revolves around our real need for community, for human contact. And I think one of the things that the pandemic has done most is to limit that ability for us to have that human contact. I know that one of the things that you do at the church is you lead these hikes, that you've been offering these hikes as a form of contact for people who can still be safely distanced, but there's a fellowship, there's an ability to see people that we haven't seen for a while, and to be able to exercise not only our bodies as we go on these hikes, but also our need for community. So I'm really grateful for that aspect of the ministry that you provide, and I know that you and Janet often do this together. So that kind of brings me back to the church part of our conversation, which is, have you always been a Presbyterian? And if not, how did you end up at RPC?
Yeah, there's been some important people and some important events along the way that got me here. My mother is certainly my first influencer. She was the granddaughter of a Scottish Presbyterian minister in Ontario. So she grew up with a strong faith. Her family moved to the prairies. Her parents moved to the prairies, and she grew up, as I mentioned, in Weyburn, Saskatchewan. Let's see. So she, one of the things that happened for us is that in my neighborhood, when I was very small, very young, a church was planted and built around the corner from where I lived. And wouldn't you know it, it was a Presbyterian church. And so that's a sign right there. And another interesting kind of thing was that the name of the road on which it was built, Richmond Road, right next to Richmond Elementary School, where I went to my early schooling. So Knox Presbyterian on Richmond Road. So we had Presbyterian in Richmond there. So a sign of what was to come, Victor. So she was, of course, thrilled and was a founding member there and got Linda and myself into Sunday school. She was great at keeping memorabilia from our childhood. And I've kept a lot of them. And somewhere here in the condo, I've got 4 or 5 Knox Presbyterian perfect Sunday school attendance certificates from the late 50s and early 60s.
You didn't get those. You didn't get those linked pins.
Yeah, I should have got something, but sadly there was really no programs for youth and teens, and so that kind of fizzled out, and I kind of wandered through the wilderness for decades, I suppose, with really having no church involvement whatsoever. I guess the next big event was when my marriage was sort of falling apart. I made the decision to end. I won't go into the details about it, of course, but that was a very stressful and difficult time, and it was a time of great vulnerability personally and uncertainty. And I guess I was looking for some kind of home or some kind of grounding or an anchor in my life to connect with. So I moved in with to a friend's place, and then I bought my own condo in Coquitlam, and I was there for a couple of years. And during that time, I happened to be reading the local paper, and there was an ad for the Alpha Group starting up at a local church, and introduction to the Christian faith. And I said, well, this is probably something I should do, and I should go. Besides, they had free food. They had a dinner every night before the thing, and of course, that's one way to get somebody to church is free food. So, and it was a great experience. I met some wonderful people. Nikki and Pippa's video, you probably are familiar with that from back then.
Mm-hmm.
Great discussions. A family hosted each week, and got to hear their faith journey and so on. And I actually was involved with that church on Sundays for a while too. However, they were quite a fundamental religion. I guess my background in social services and vulnerable people, and I certainly had friends in the LGBTQ community and worked with many, certainly at Robson Clinic, colleagues as well as clients. And I just found that not to be a good fit. I actually tried another Coquitlam church as well and had the same problem. So I kind of once again drifted away a bit. And at that point, I guess Janet came into my life, and long story short, I sold the condo and moved in with her and her boys in Richmond. She had a lot of similarities to my situation. She was a single parent. Interesting story. We were talking about faith one day, and I mentioned my Presbyterian background, and she was amazed. She says, outside of church, I've never met another person who is Presbyterian.
Yeah, we're an endangered.
I got some points. I made some inroads there, Victor, so that worked out well.
We are unfortunately an endangered species. we Presbyterians. We got to stick together.
So we moved in together. We sold that house and bought another big house because my son was coming to live with us as he was starting UBC engineering. So we had a big house. We got married in 2004 at the church. It was Tony Plomp's last wedding ceremony, if I remember right. And Janet's dad, the Reverend Dr. Arthur Curry, also was part of the ceremony. And let's see, Graham was on doing the music, and Lynn Walters sang, and Joan did the flowers. So certainly I got very involved in the church, joined the church, was on on the board for many years. I chaired a bunch of search committees and did a bunch of social events, and the car rally, which it's still in the fireside room. We've got that hanging up there. That was Alan Fairburn's little award that he created, the Holy Hubcap, which was great fun. And I did a bunch of other social stuff. So I got certainly involved with the church, and that was very meaningful for me along the way.
If I'm not mistaken, you were chairing the search committee that brought me to Richmond.
Well, Sarah and I were certainly involved with that, and I remember interviewing you, and I think we hauled you in from the pool in Seoul for the interview.
Yeah,
and it was in the morning your time, was the evening our time, but
yeah, the formal interview. I was actually at a resort on the coast of Korea with my wife's family, And it was early in the morning, and I went off by myself to do a Zoom interview, or I guess I don't know what it was. It was a FaceTime interview
Yeah.
with you, and of course the search committee was seated in the living room of what would turn out to be the manse
That's
where I live
right.
now.
That's right. That's right. Well,
um,
you were certainly a huge reason why I'm where I am now. Um, and as you know, Janet and I, we moved. The boys grew up and left home. We didn't need a big house, so we sold the house in Richmond, moved into the city here in Falls Creek. Um, and for a while, we were really questioning whether we were going to continue at RPC or not. We loved the community. We had such close relationships that was the deal, but it was a long commute. And we were really thinking about maybe finding a church we could walk to. And there was one across the way here that we attended a little bit. And we're kind of up in the air as to our church future. But as you mentioned, I was on the search committee that hired you and kind of chased you down a little bit, if I remember right, to begin with, and you weren't available right away. But later you were, and the timing was immaculate because we were right down to the end there, making a decision. It was quite a lengthy and circuitous process, but we were just so thrilled that you were available, and your interview and your the way you presented your faith and beliefs was certainly in sync with me and in sync with what I thought the church needed, and we were all in agreement with that, and there you came. So you've been a wonderful blessing to me and to the church, and we're so grateful and so thankful that you were there. So you were a huge part of that. Let me mention another person that was very important to me in terms of becoming an elder. I'd been approached a couple of times before, and I'd always said no, and I kind of blew it off, saying I was busy and work and so on. I think everybody that you've interviewed has said this.
Pretty much.
But then it came up again, after you were here for a while, and you were looking for people to nominate folks. And Charles Yang pulled me out a couple of times at Munch and Mingle and mentioned for me to come and sit down. And when Charles calls you, you come. And we had I remember two quite lengthy chats. And he was wanting to nominate me, and I was sort of saying, I sort of explained my reticence. I guess my major reticence was, frankly, I didn't feel worthy. And I wasn't involved with the church for all those years. I didn't pray enough. I didn't read the Bible enough. I didn't know if I was appropriate to be in that role. I could certainly go on the board and lead hikes, but to be an elder might be a different animal. But Charles, I guess, saw something in me, and he encouraged me, and he said, this is an opportunity for you to learn and grow in those areas that you feel you want to and need to. And well, that kind of convinced me, and it changed my mind. So I let my name, and the rest is kind of history. But so Charles is a very wise man. He's got a book out, and I don't know if you've read about it on his life. And frankly, you should be interviewing him, Victor. He's much more interesting than me.
Well, we'll get to people like Charles and many, many others who have got amazing stories. Yeah. Thanks for sharing all of this. I think you're right that every elder that I've interviewed so far has said that they never felt like they were worthy. And I don't know of any elder that I've ever known who has really campaigned to be an elder, who has gone around saying, vote me, vote me. It really is a call. It really is a call that comes to us. And that call needs to take root in our hearts, but also in the hearts of other people. And I think it's when other people around us, like Charles Yang or other people, say, hey, Steve, you should really think about this. Nobody's perfect, but this is, you're not an elder because you're perfect. You're an elder because you're willing to allow yourself to be used by God for God's purposes. And we seek to be faithful. And we're always growing. So I think it's an encouragement to many, many others who see themselves as being, well, I could never do this. Well, it's not necessarily about you. It's about what God will do through you. And I think our willingness to allow that to happen in our lives. So I thank you for that story. Just to kind of close up our time here, Steve, when the pandemic sort of subsides and the restrictions are lifted, what do you, maybe not the answer that we're getting a lot, which is we all want to come back to church. We like that. I'm all for that, of course. But if there's something beyond the church that are you really, really looking forward to that you haven't been able to do much, that once the restrictions are loosened a bit, what are you looking forward to?
Yeah, well, the church certainly is critical. You're right. We've had to, my son Adam, we've got two Adams and an Eric, by the way. I think Janet mentioned that. But my son Adam is our granddaughter, Jaden, and she's pregnant and about to give birth any hour right now. So
Wow.
we're kind of on hold there. And due to that, we've had to kind of pull back and really limit our bubble. And in fact, in the last little while, we haven't been seeing them either. So we've been really limited in terms of our family contacts and to be together in person. Jen and I really miss that opportunity to hug our granddaughter and to be around hopefully our baby grandchild coming up. So family time together. And I guess the obvious things about being able to get out and go to plays and go to shows and go to restaurants and travel. I mean, we did a lot of travel within the province this summer, but international travel. Connect, have friends into our house, go in and visit friends, socialize, connect a little bit more. Connections are so important, and communities are so important, especially when you're retired and you no longer have a work community. And I don't have due to my health, my heart, I don't have a running club community either, which I had, which was very important for many years. So, you're definitely limited in terms of your community. So the opportunity to rebuild communities and get those supportive, loving connections again is really, really important, and something I'm sure looking forward to.
Steve, thanks for sharing all of this with us. I know we've only really scratched the surface of so much more we could talk about. And I think going forward, I certainly would like to connect with you and Janet again, maybe a bit more about sort of, some of the issues around our fears or our anxieties, some of these things, and how to look at options for us to really tackle those things in a good and faithful way. So I look forward to more conversations with you, but I just want to thank you for sharing what you've shared with us today, and for the work that you continue to do as a member of our session for the faithful service that you provide here at Richmond Presbyterian Church. And I want to wish you and Janet well as you await the birth of your grandchild, is it?
Grandchild. We don't know if it's a boy or a girl.
Yeah, so grandchild. And we hope that all will turn out well. So let me end by saying a little prayer.
Thank you.
Gracious God, I want to thank you for the conversation that Steve and I have been able to have. And I want to pray for your blessing and for your equipping to continue to be with Steve as an elder of the church here at Richmond, but also as a husband and a father and grandfather, as a counselor to many, and as just a friend to many in the community, and someone with a lot of wisdom. So encourage all of us to use our gifts in the best ways that we know how, and help us to find ways to be connected, even in this time of pandemic, whether it's through our services online, whether it's through other opportunities that we have with communities that are online, or in ways that we can safely be together with people. Help us to think always of others, their needs, even as we know that you are caring for us and providing for our needs. Bless our time, for we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. Steve, it's been good to be in conversation with you. Wish you well, and I will just pray for good news for you and your family shortly.
Thanks, Victor. It's great to be with you.
Take care.
Bye, everybody.